Hello and welcome to the War Report. Now, this is my first multi-stream, so this should be pretty fun. I'll take a look at how all this works. I may run into some technical difficulties, but for those of you watching on both platforms, it's very nice to see you all. I'll try to interact as much with the chat with as I can, but I will have to say, I am short a co-host tonight. I usually have someone else doing this with me, for those of you who are new. It's a very fun time. We talk about geopolitical stuff. We talk about all sorts of issues. For example, what we have on the list tonight, some NATO stuff, some stuff about the Russian sanctions, and um, some Syria withdrawal stuff. So for those of you interested, this should be a good time. I hope you guys stick around because we get pretty in depth with it. It's not everyone's taste, but to each his own. But let me just pull up my YouTube chat and I'll get right into it. Make sure everything is going fine and dandy. I see I have one viewer on Stream Me. Thank you for sticking around. But yeah, we'll get that all taken care of. I know this is going to be a bit of a choppy episode. Technical difficulties are a staple of the show, believe it or not. So we'll take a look at that, and you know what? It's going to be a fun time. It's going to be a good time. But to get into the topics, let's just make sure everything's fine and dandy on YouTube first. Sorry about the choppy intro. Not much I can do about it currently. But let's check. Okay, come on. So sorry about the leaving you guys high and dry. I'm just trying to figure this out real quick. Now I should be live now, and I am. I am. So let me just take care of this real quick. Sorry about fumbling around with. Let me just take. And with that little delay, we can now begin. I apologize for that, but first we're starting out today with Trump's comments on the wonderful alliance known as NATO. Now, aides claim throughout 2018, Trump repeatedly said that he wanted to leave NATO and was skeptical of the alliance's reasons for existence, and constantly made statements disparaging the alliance, questioning it, and calling into question why the U.S. is even still there. Now, these claims were even made just days before the NATO summit back last July. Now, these comments sent Bolton and Mattis into a tailspin, which I suppose that's always good. And they scrambled to keep Trump on track during the summit, make sure he didn't buck the line too much. And you know what? It's to be expected. Trump is surrounded by these kind of people all the time. And this actually these comments, this story, caused NATO leadership to cancel the summit in Washington, scheduled for April of this year, due to fears that Trump would renew his attack lines, and they have decided to schedule the summit somewhere else, without the leaders of their respective countries sending lower level diplomats because they're that afraid of Donald Trump. Now, I think that's actually quite interesting that because a lot of people will say, "Oh, Trump's Trump does X, Y, and Z. He's not good on this issue. He's becoming a neocon," and that cannot be further from the truth, if you ask me. I mean, frankly, I think it's actually ridiculous to insinuate this, considering the fact how often these things come out. And I am very pleased with these comments, but it gets better, trust me. Trump also broke several protocols during last year's summit by discussing internal alliance business in front of non-member states such as Georgia and Ukraine. Both states are trying to become members of NATO at least, and both which have their problems with Russia. Yeah, I see. You can probably make the connections right now. And Trump also decided to leave in the middle of Merkel's speech last year. Now, of course, the usual suspects were enraged by these comments and viciously attacked Trump. Now, infamous Congressman Adam Schiff, known for the, oh, we can just, we have the nukes, the gunners stand no chance. That guy, he made that tweet back in, I believe, November. He went as far as to say this was grounds to use the 25th Amendment. For those of you who don't know, the 25th Amendment says the cabinet of a president, along with the vice president, can rule the president unfit for office and remove him and replace him with the vice president. And on top of this, former Secretary of Defense Mattis criticized Trump in his farewell letter for lack of commitment to American alliances. Now, acting Secretary of Defense Shanahan is believed to support NATO, but believes the Pentagon should not be a, quote, Department of No to the office of the president. Now, like I said, cannot be happier with Trump's rhetoric on NATO. Frankly, like I said, early on, especially during the Syria strikes this year, I was concerned about Trump. I thought we lost him, especially in the foreign policy front. Now, I have plenty of problems with Trump aside from that, but his foreign policy has been pretty solid for the past few months now, which that's saying a lot because Trump and his administration are not known for stability, for better or for worse. Now, I will say, I don't expect us to get out of NATO anytime soon. Of course not. But I see the alliance really starting to crumble, and you know what? That's good. And frankly, it hasn't really served a purpose since the 1990s. It hasn't served a purpose since the Soviet Union was still in existence. Oh, sorry about that. Go there. Technical difficulties. I'm a bit of a boomer at this, but yeah, as I was saying, NATO has not served a purpose since the 1990s, and frankly, I don't know why it still exists. It exists because people want to stick it to Russia, but I'm rambling at this point. But, of course, this just proves that he's a Russian puppet. He's colluding with Russia. He doesn't want this alliance that steps on Moscow's balls, so therefore he all of a sudden must be Vladimir Putin's best friend, despite the fact he'll come out many times, and, I actually get a bit annoyed when he says this, nobody's been tougher on Russia than me. But he's got a point, not that I'm necessarily happy with it. Of course, my longtime viewers know I'm in favor of reconciling relations with the Russians rather than antagonizing them. But he's got a point. By actions, Trump hasn't been the best on Russia, like I said. And that comes with its own set of drawbacks and benefits. But point being, this NATO thing is ridiculous. And we're watching Democrats who said these same exact talking points 10 years ago become the staunchest defenders of this decrepit alliance. And to insinuate that the president is mentally ill because he doesn't want to continue to subsidize the defense of Europe, it's mind-boggling, it's insane, and frankly, it's just frustrating. I don't know any other words for it, but let's on the topic of Russia, I suppose we can move on to the second topic for tonight, which is the battle over sanctioning the evil Russians. Now, in December, Trump ordered the Treasury Department to lift sanctions on Oleg Deripaska. Now, I don't know if I have any Russian speakers in the audience. If I do, I hope I did not butcher that pronunciation. And 3 of his companies. Now, the Senate moved to block this because it's within the Senate's power to block certain foreign policy moves. I mean, take what you will. It's not unheard of, is what I'm saying. But the Senate moved to block this with 11 Republicans breaking rank with Trump. Now, the resolution, fortunately, still fell short of the 60 votes needed, but it gets better because the House decided to pass a symbolic resolution with over 100 House Republicans breaking ranks to vote for it. That's where we're standing now, that Russia is just such a despicable country in the eyes of these people that we just have to break ranks and vote for sanctions until the end of all time. It's honestly frustrating. I could go on this all day, but it gets better because Senate Republicans who voted for this were, of course, Suzanne Collins of Maine, Josh Hawley of Missouri, which is pretty disappointing. I was looking forward to him. He just came into office a couple weeks ago after the recent election. John Boozman of Arkansas, no surprise. Tom Cotton of Arkansas, no, that is definitely no surprise. Steve Daines of Montana, I'm not too familiar with him. Cory Gardner of Colorado, of course he did. John Kennedy of Louisiana, very much critical of the meeting with Russia last summer. No surprise he voted for this. He's John Kennedy of Louisiana. No relation to the Kennedy family, believe it or not. Martha McSally of Arizona, again, another Yeah, another incoming senator, but of course we get all these rhinos. They come out of Arizona. I don't know what it is about Arizona. It might as well be a blue state at this point, honestly. Of course, the couple other senators who also voted with the Democrats on this were Marco Rubio, pretty much the neocon poster boy that really pushed that in 2016. Ben Sass in Nebraska, another neocon pretty boy, and Jerry Moran of Kansas. Now, frankly, I believe that should be Jerry Moron, but I digress on that point in particular. But it's just frustrating. You have these neoconservatives who, look, whether for ideological reasons or whether they have a moneyed interest in it, such as stocks in arms companies, they want to see Russia crumbled. It's honestly, I mean, this goes back over 150 years. Goes back to Lord Salisbury's letters to the Queen. I believe it was in 1850, but pretty much the UK, later followed by the US, has for about the past 150, 160 years had it as an explicit foreign policy goal to cripple the Russian country. Whether it be by balkanization through supporting separatist movements such as the Chechens or other Caucasian Muslims such as the Dagestanis. There's a few other groups, or whether it be just by economically crippling them. I mean, we somewhat did it during the collapse of the Soviet Union. I'm not defending the Soviet Union or anything, but you saw several countries secede from Russia, such as Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, the rest of the Baltic states, Kazakhstan. I could go on all day about this, but frankly, it's an outdated policy for an old world order, and we're still living like it's the 80s and 90s. Democrats want to take us back to the 90s. Republicans want to take us back to the 80s. Frankly, it's like I said, it's frustrating. I'm at somewhat of a loss for words here. I get annoyed because we're making enemies where we don't need them. Why are we still antagonizing Russia after all this time? The Russians, they present no threat, and look, even we let the Russians have full reign over the Black Sea and let them have access to the Mediterranean, I still do not feel threatened by the Russian government to take, honestly, any action. Russia, especially Vladimir Putin, has expressed several times he wants to reconcile with the West. He wants to improve relations. He doesn't want sanctions. He's not a communist. He's not a fascist. He's not any of these things that the media tries to paint him as. But at the end of the day, we need to put pressure on Russia, and you know what? China, they can just go scot-free. They can do whatever they want. The Chinese, they can operate with free reign, but we have to do trade with them because trade war's bad. Blah, 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 blah. It's honestly, it's frankly, I'm pretty much at a loss for words because honestly, all I can say is it's annoying. It's mind-boggling why we're still doing this. By the way, yeah, I see my connection's a bit bad. Can you tell me in the chat how I'm doing? Am I cutting out any? But yeah, the neocons. Honestly, I thought their age was over, but there still seems to be holdouts with them. It's so frustrating. But again, fortunately enough, Trump did rebuke them, and even if this motion did pass, it was not veto-proof, so Trump could have shot this down. But point being, we shouldn't be in this position. We shouldn't be debating the Russian issue in 2019. We're almost 2 decades into the new century, and we still view Russia as the greatest geopolitical foe we have. I'm sorry, Mitt Romney, you were wrong. That was Obama's one moment of clarity. And just not go on this tangent. Obama wasn't weak on Russia. He damn near brought us to World War III. How many times? Like 3 times over the Syria issue, over Ukraine. His entire foreign policy goal was to see Vladimir Putin removed from office. Honestly, I need to go on because I think I'm spurting out a bit here. But let's talk about a much calmer subject: Brexit. Now, Theresa May has narrowly survived another no confidence vote with a 326 to 305 after her proposal for Brexit was defeated on, I believe it was Monday, and then they had the no confidence vote on Tuesday. Now, this is the, I believe, 5th no confidence vote within a year that Theresa May has faced, because she's been fighting an uphill battle. She has shown herself as a completely incompetent leader. I'm starting to buy into the theory that she was there to purposely sabotage the Brexit movement. And, of course, she comes out saying, we have until Monday to hammer out a new deal. Now, keep in mind, the date for Brexit, the date that the article is actually supposed to get triggered, is, I believe, March 19th. It's sometime in March, so they're pushing it. They have 2 months to hammer out a deal, which Brussels is most likely going to reject. Honestly, if I were the British, if I were Theresa May, I would take the no deal at this point, and I would take all the challenges that go with that, lick my wounds and recover, because it's better than being a vassal to the EU or giving up your sovereignty to the EU and not even having a vote within the European Parliament, which that's what it's looking like it's going to come to. Now, Theresa May said she was willing to work with all parties to negotiate a Brexit deal. And, of course, Jeremy Corbyn, pretty much came out of the Trotsky yesterday, so I had a bit of a soft spot for him, believe it or not, but, not so much now. He's refusing to negotiate with the Labour government. In some ways, I can't blame him, because who wants to sit across from Theresa May for more than 5 minutes? I mean, that woman, honestly, she looks like a witch. She looks like a vampire, if we're being honest. She is not a flattering woman in any way, shape, or form. It's not even that she's a bad leader, but a good person. She seems like just a terrible person to be around. I'm not even saying that she's outright an unpleasant person, but there's something that gives off a vibe about her that I probably wouldn't like spending time around her too much, nor do I doubt any of you would. But that is all fun. Honestly, sometimes all you can do is laugh at this, and I have done that several times myself. But Germany, it gets better in terms of the Brexit deal, because Germany has now come out, and they're apparently pretty nervous about the possibility of a Brexit. Now, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, the leader of the CDU, which is Merkel's party, and Merkel's presumed successor after Merkel steps down by or before 2021, along with several other German politicians, wrote a letter to the British public and the British Parliament begging them to stay in the European Union. It was pathetic. It was pretty groveling, saying, "Oh, we'll miss your tea. We'll miss the British humor." They act like the British leaving the European Union is going to just be the end of German-British relations for all time. Again, it sounds pathetic. You can read it yourself. Of course, it's translation, so it's not going to be 100% accurate, but I digress on that point. But yeah, this showed an element. I thought the Germans, I figured they were just pretty confident about it, seeing, I thought, like, oh yeah, we can weather the UK leaving. Maybe back in 2016 they had that attitude, but over the past 2 years, things have not gone the EU's way, especially with a lot of the European elections. You'd think, Hungary, Italy, Poland, this real populist bloc that's forming a lot of Eastern Europe and a lot of Southern Europe are starting to turn against the European Union. Of course, the UK leaves, so I can see why the Germans might be concerned, considering the fact the EU is pretty much another attempt at German hegemony over Europe. Honestly, people say Fourth Reich. It's a bit of a boomer thing to say, but at the end of the day, it is a German project to dominate Europe economically, at least. Chat makes a good point. Yeah, it's probably cheaper to buy tea from India, so somebody should pass that along to the German government. But despite May's comments, prominent leaders of the Leave campaign, such as Nigel Farage, there were others, but it was mainly Farage coming out and saying, you need to be prepared for a second referendum, and he fears that they'll try to stifle the process by holding another vote. Now, you look at the opinion polling, it's skewed, of course, at the mainstream media. They say, oh, most British citizens, they want to stay in the European Union. They regret their vote. Oh, look at all these people who regret voting for Brexit. Similar to what they did with Trump in the immediate aftermath of the election. Look at how many people regret voting for Trump. Look at how many people just despise Orange Hitler after supporting him for months upon months upon months. They're doing this with Brexit, and they're trying to force another vote. Now, the first vote was razor thin as it is. And the last 2 years the last almost 3 years at this point, have been nothing but demoralizing in terms of the negotiations, the process leading up to it, the international reaction. So, I honestly think if they could force another vote, that it would keep the British in the European Union. And at this point, May's government has put themselves into a lose-lose situation. They could take a no-deal Brexit, which would hit them hard economically, and it would probably be the end of the Conservative government, especially under May. Option 2 is they could go groveling back to Brussels and say, we're sorry, please accept us back, we promise not to stand against the hegemony of the EU ever again. Or they could go with the third and probably the worst option. They could take the soft Brexit deal with Brussels, which would subject them to all the EU rules, but taking away their seat at the EU Parliament and taking away any voice they would have within the European Union, which would make them a true vassal rather than a member state. I'm not saying there's much of a difference, but at least you had some MPs who could fight back within the European Parliament if that were the case. But if they were to go through with the soft Brexit, they would just be sacrificing all of that in order to be dictated by Brussels. Their internal policy, how long until their foreign policy? I mean, the European Union army, people joked about it, people called you conspiracy theorist for it, but you have Macron coming out in October, November saying, oh yeah, we do need a pan-European security force because NATO isn't stable enough, but that's beside the point. But the bigger news of the week is that Trump Syria withdrawal is still on. It's faced some setbacks, specifically this terrorist attack that happened in Manjib this week. It's a very I don't speak Arabic. I'm sorry, but on Wednesday there was an ISIS attack in the Kurdish-controlled majority Arab city of Manjib. We're going with Manjib. 19 people were killed by a suicide bomber, including 4 U.S. servicemen. Now, of course, the neocon vultures immediately used the deaths of these men to call for maintaining U.S. presence and that ISIS isn't truly defeated, and that we need to stay there until the end of time. Now, Rand Paul, fortunately, was one of the first people Trump talked to on this issue, and Trump later told Senate Republicans that he was standing by his decision, which rebukes Bolton's comments earlier this month when he traveled to Israel. Now, Bolton said when he traveled to Israel that U.S. withdrawal would be conditional based on Turkey's behavior and the defeat of ISIS in securing the Kurdish state. He didn't say Kurdish state, but securing for a secure future for the Kurdish groups. I can't remember exactly how I phrased it, but pretty much he said, oh yeah, we're pretty much going to stay there to protect the Kurds until Turkey backs down. Which, of course, it's John Bolton. He was trying to find an excuse to justify the U.S. staying there until the end of time. Of course, that rolls around. I'm not a fan of John Bolton, for those of you new viewers on our friends over at Stream Me. Now, I will say this, for plug time. I'm also on Stream Me if you on YouTube want to go over and check out my channel there. But Bolton, like I said, his comments were pretty much rebuked by Trump saying this. Now, I saw many initially saying this was a false flag, that this was a false flag trying to get Trump to stay there. It wasn't really ISIS that did this. But I do say, if they were going to fake something to get the U.S. to stay in Syria, they would have blamed it on the Iranians, a Shia militia, or Assad's forces, like they have the other times. They wouldn't blame it on ISIS. I believe ISIS, I mean, they're no geniuses. I think they would pull something stupid enough to actually... I think they would attack the U.S. on withdrawal. They're not the highest IQ people. They're not exactly the brain trust. They're not the best at it. I mean, they're a militant group that got some old U.S. equipment. They're not exactly the modern military geniuses of our age. So I don't believe this was a false flag, but I don't believe this is a reason we should be staying in Syria either. Now, after this attack, Turkey warned the Syrian government not to use the U.S. withdrawal as an excuse to fill the vacuum being left behind. And Kurdish forces are actually already in negotiations with the Syrian government. Now, many are trying to say that the U.S. should remain longer to prevent Turkey from invading Kurdish Syria. Of course, I've gone over this. We have to protect the Kurds. We have to protect these communists, blah, 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 blah. But I think the idea that Turkey would invade is patently ridiculous. Honestly, Turkey would have no interest in invading, because we look at it. They're not going to risk war with Assad's forces, and they will not risk tanking their newly built relations with Russia and, to an extent, Iran. And they will not risk angering the U.S. over Kurdish militias, especially after John Bolton's comments. I say a lot about John Bolton. He's a blowhard. He's X, Y, and Z. But he does strike fear into people, and he does usually get countries to fall in line. Like I said, he's sort of like a junkyard dog. So long as you don't let him off the chain, he can stay around, and he serves somewhat of a purpose. But I think it's a bit ridiculous. People are implying that Turkey's just going to throw away this relationship they've been building with Russia, their improved relations with Iran, and the de-escalation in Syria just to take care of some Kurdish militias that are giving them some trouble sometimes and attacking their military base sometimes. It the risk would not be worth the reward, is what I'm getting at. Now, many point at Afrin, the city that was had Turkish occupation, the Kurdish-controlled city that the Turkish forces took over last year. But you have to remember, Afrin fell because the Kurds did not allow Syrian forces in. Had they allowed Syrian forces in, which the Syrian forces offered to let them in, there were plenty Kurds who actually supported it, but the leadership ultimately said, we can stand against the Turks ourselves, and look how that turned out for them. Now, because of this, I don't even know what you'd call it. I wouldn't necessarily call it a powder keg, because I really don't think it's dangerous enough to warrant being called a powder keg, but this debacle, we'll call it. Because of this, Erdogan is expected to meet with Vladimir Putin this upcoming Thursday in Moscow to discuss this issue in particular. They'll be discussing other issues, but this is the focus of the meeting. Now, based on the relationship between Putin and Erdogan, I wouldn't really know how to describe it, because Erdogan, like I said, he's played this both sides before. He's decided, I'm going to be friendly with the U.S., I'm going to be friendly with Russia, I'm going to court the Chinese, I'm going to court the European Union, I'm going to go to any major power I can, see what deal they can give me, and I'll go with them. So Erdogan is very good at playing this fluctuation game, but based on previous deals Putin has made with Erdogan on the topic of Syria, such as delaying the Idlib offensive, other deals they've made, other de-escalation deals they've made, I don't see a Turkish offensive into Syria, nor do I think the Turkish forces are willing to, nor do I think Erdogan is willing to spend the political capital to wage a war on the Syrians. The only acceptable excuse to invade Turkey is to retake Constantinople. But as I said earlier on Twitter, with the absolute state of the West today, we'd probably get to Israel, of all people, and call the Hagia Sophia a synagogue. That's the point we're at now. We would probably do that. Now, hopefully that doesn't get me banned off YouTube, since I know they're rather fickle with those kinds of comments these days, but yeah, that's all aside the point. Now, more news out of the Middle East, somewhat on the Syria issue, is Benjamin Netanyahu, the illustrious Prime Minister of the State of Israel, our greatest ally, of course. He would never do anything to wrong us. He would never take advantage of us at all. He would stand by us through all of it, despite selling our secrets to China and giving access to the Mediterranean for China. But he's still our greatest ally. But Netanyahu said, after appointing a new military chief, that Iran should get out of Syria fast. Now, as we discussed last week on our 2018 interview episode, Netanyahu, especially over the past year, has proven himself to be quite the paper tiger in terms of especially Syria. He'll say he's going to launch this major attack. He'll say he's going to strike Iranian targets. He'll say all these things. But at the end of the day, he fires a few missiles, does a few airstrikes, most of which get intercepted by Russian-made S-200s that the Syrians have. Now, keep in mind, this is outdated Russian technology that is getting hit. You have outdated Russian technology taking down supposedly U.S. state-of-the-art technology. Now, like I said last week, this tells us a couple things. Either U.S. technology isn't as good as we think it is, or Israel is completely incompetent. Now, I think it's a bit of a combination between the two. But it's interesting to watch Israel come out and make these threats, especially before an election, which Netanyahu will be facing an election in, I believe, April, definitely within the next few months. I believe it's April. But he always does this before an election. He always drums up fear of war. He did this with Iran, because last Israel election aligned with the time the Iran deal was being negotiated, so he said, we must be strong against Iran even though the world powers are appeasing them, blah, 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 blah. The usual rhetoric coming out of there. But aside from that, it's pretty much Netanyahu just beating the war drum again. And you know what? I'll tell you this. I think he's actually going to lose re-election, but we'll cover that in the following weeks as the Israeli election actually picks up. But I do want to move on to some trade war news. Now, Mnuchin, who is the Treasury Secretary, has decided to, he has stated actually, he wants to lift tariffs in order to reach an agreement with China sooner to stabilize the markets. Now, I've said this plenty of times before. I'll say it again. I absolutely disagree with this move. We should not be looking to make a deal with China. We should be looking to put pressure on China. I am not interested in fair trade with China. I'm interested in kneecapping China because they are a rising ally, not rising adversary, not ally. Oh, God, no. They are a rising adversary that is subsidized directly by the West. If the U.S. would stop trading with China, the Chinese economy would fall by 37%. Almost half of their economy is based on trade with outsiders, specifically the United States. The United States would hit a recession, but it would not destroy us. We should not be making deals with China. We should be keeping up pressure on China. We should let Japan have more free range over its military, lift the arms bar we have on them since World War II, which I believe expires in 2045. But we should not be looking to make friends with China. It's ridiculous, and it's one of the areas I'm more critical on is Trump. I can credit him for taking on the Chinese in the first place, but I'm not going to credit him or people in his cabinet for wanting to talk things out with the Chinese on trade. Look, I have no problem with diplomacy, but I don't want them to be so economically intertwined with us, and I think that's actually led to a lot of problems. And I've gone this issue at length, but I do have a bit of a side story. This is actually more funny than anything. Now, Trump has blown off the Davos summit, the Davos, Switzerland summit. Now, Trump canceled his trip to Davos, Switzerland for the World Economic Forum summit, citing the government shutdown as reason. Now, that was the same reason he also barred Pelosi from using military aircraft to travel to Brussels and Afghanistan, saying, you need to stay in Washington and negotiate. We can't pay those pilots because it's the government shutdown. You can go, but you got to use your private aircraft, which we all know Pelosi's a multimillionaire. It would not be a dent in her pocket to get a private flight over there, but I thought it was a bit funny that Trump is blowing off this, honestly, cabal of globalists. I don't know what else to call it. Davos is home. The Davos summit is home to some of the worst scumbags on this planet. The usurers, the warmongers, the globalists. Honestly, look, yeah, all the things you can put echo quotes, and frankly, they all are at Davos. So I am not slighted by Trump missing out on this meeting at all. Now, as I recently mentioned him, Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, and a U.S. delegation will still be showing up, so will Mike Pompeo, but Trump himself will not be showing up, and you know what? I'm not going to shed a tear over that. I'm not too worked up over that. But let's just finish off the couple more stories, because it's a bit of a shorter episode, a nice little Friday night stream, but I have a couple more stories about Venezuela in particular, and then we'll cover some stuff on the Korean issue. So, Venezuela, this week has been pretty focused around Venezuela. It's gotten pushed down, but it's been in the news a little bit. Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced on, I believe it was Monday, the Venezuelan government under Maduro is now illegitimate, and that the Venezuelan opposition has followed suit and parroted Pompeo's talking points. Now, the Organization for American States also voted in a 19-6, with 8 abstaining, that Maduro's government is illegitimate, claiming that last election wasn't free or fair, and that Maduro's new term should not be happening. Now, seeing as Venezuela is a failed state, technically Maduro's government is illegitimate because they have lost the ability to govern it. Now, I see no reason for the U.S. to come out and declare it, though. Venezuela has never been a threat to the U.S., nor is it especially now that it's crumbling. I don't understand why we're being so hawkish on Venezuela. It's one area of the world we don't need to be. I mean, it's one of very many areas of the world we don't need to be. It's falling apart itself. We should be taking a complete hands-off approach. Because any involvement we have, even comments like that, gives the Venezuelan regime, gives Maduro's government, an excuse as to why their country is failing. They can say it's the evil Western pigs. It's the great Satan United States as to why we're failing, not our own incompetence. But if we stay away and then have the helping hand to rebuild Venezuela and build them into a U.S. ally after their collapse, I believe that's a much smarter strategy to take a hands-off approach and come to them after they take care of the Maduro issue. Because Maduro's days are pretty much numbered. His military, there's rumblings against him. You have what's happening in Brazil with Bolsonaro. Of course, he is not the biggest fan of Maduro. You have the Paraguayans actually closing their embassy in Caracas. So things are not looking rosy for Venezuela, is my point. And many powers in the region, whether it be Colombia, whether it be Brazil, could take care of the issue. Now, many do speculate that Brazil, under the leadership of Bolsonaro, may intervene and get rid of Maduro, but honestly, I don't think it will happen. I think it's more likely to be the Colombians, if anything, because the Colombians have bore the brunt of the Venezuelan refugees, and I would say they have the most reason to intervene. But Brazil is also too bogged down with internal issues. You see what Bolsonaro has been doing. He's really been doing pretty much a purge. He's been cleaning out a lot of things, passing a lot of reforms. But yeah, Brazil is focusing on itself internally right now. They're not really in a place to wage a war. Now, I look, and I have no problem with that. If the Venezuelan people get rid of Maduro, so be it. If they keep him, so be it. Either way, I think no matter what the future of Venezuela is, I don't care whether they're socialists or communists or whatever, we should be reaching out to them. Say, look, I don't care about your ideology, but we're here to do business. That's how I approach pretty much every country in the world. Barring a few exceptions, such, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, countries like that. But again, Venezuela, we're really chasing after this country that's pretty much destroying itself, and it just, I say it makes us look foolish. We're calling it an illegitimate state. We're saying military options aren't off the table for a country that can't even manage to extract its own oil. But to finish off the show, a pretty big story hit today, which I'm glad I delayed it. Delayed the show a couple days because I wouldn't have gotten this gem of the news. So there is apparently going to be a second Korean summit in February. Now, I am honestly overjoyed about this. The more negotiations with Korea, the better. Oh, granted, the Korean issue has pretty much been a self-solving one ever since the U.S. facilitated talks. North Korea and South Korea have been very close. They've been very cooperative. In fact, it's actually the 2019 handbooks that they distribute to South Korean troops in South Korea. Their government has removed viewing North Korea as an enemy or their missiles as the threat. Said they want to work with technological cooperation with China, which I do find a bit concerning, considering the fact East Asia is one of the few foreign theaters that America actually does have a stake in and actually could make a difference in and actually could protect our own interests in. So I'm a bit concerned about one of our closer allies wanting to align with China. I really think we should I don't think now is the right time to step in, especially with the progress in Korea, but I do think we should be keeping an eye on that. And their third point on the new military manifesto was they were removing Japan as a partner for securing free markets, democracy, and other platitudes such as that. But this actually does play into a prediction we've made on the show before, that you're kind of going to get a tripolar Asia with more unified Korea. I'm not saying an outright unified Korea, but North and South Korea cooperating with each other against the Chinese and the Japanese and create kind of a rivalry triangle. Instead of a love triangle, it's a rivalry triangle with Japan, Korea, and China all pitted against each other. Now, I think, of course, the U.S. could probably benefit greatly from this by turning Korea and Japan against China, but it could go either way. But the more multipolarism, the better. It's kind of the philosophy I have about internal government, because you have, look, the more centralized something is, the less efficient it is. And that's why I think about U.S. hegemony, or globalism as it's known. I think the U.S. pretty much controlling the entire world has really bogged things down. I think it has the same effect as heavy centralization. So I think the more players there are, the more rivalry there are, the better it's going to be, and also more technological advancement. I think about it. We went to space as a species during the height of the Cold War. Granted, it was, kidnapped Nazi scientists from the Soviet Union playing against kidnapped Nazi scientists in the U.S., but point being, we still got the space during one of the most contentious periods in history. But, as I said, the White House has announced a second Korean summit scheduled for the end of February. And this happened after a meeting today with Kim Yong Chol, who is I believe, the Korean Foreign Secretary. He met with Pompeo and Trump in Washington today. Now, there was no announcement of an official date or location for the summit, but Trump said the sanctions would continue, but things are going very well, and there hasn't been any missile tests, nor has there been any nuclear test, and things are looking pretty positive. Now, Trump also rebuked John Bolton yet again, because Bolton said back in December, well, we don't think North Korea is following the program we set up, and we think they're, skirting some of the treaties we signed, which, of course, isn't happening. Number one, we didn't sign any formalized treaties. Number two, they haven't done much in the way of pretty much anything ever since the beginning of last year, honestly, even before the summit. But I'm more than optimistic about this. I actually see something good coming out of the Korea situation. I think the U.S. needs to be very careful on this. I don't think we should be too tough on this. I think we should be lifting some sanctions now. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's for the two Koreas to reconcile. It doesn't matter what China thinks, doesn't matter what Japan or the U.S. thinks. It's about the people in Korea, the Koreans, who live on the Korean peninsula. Look, now, outside powers can help. Outside powers have their interests, of course. But we should be taking a hands-off approach, and we should be watching China to make sure they don't subvert this process. Because, look, the Chinese are a necessary player in this process, but I do not trust them in the slightest. I've established this not only today, but several times over and over and over in the past. I do not trust the Chinese, and if anything, rather than putting scrutiny on North Korea, we need to be putting scrutiny on China to make sure they don't subvert this process or try to do anything to South Korea, or even North Korea for that matter. But again, I'm very optimistic. I wonder if it's going to be Singapore again. It would be nice to see Kim Jong-un come to D.C., or even Trump go to Pyongyang. I mean, look, I've joked about it, but, Nazbol Trump, can you imagine him standing in front of those North Korean monuments? That would be a great aesthetics. But again, that is all aside the point. But yeah, I would like it for Kim Jong-un to come to Washington. Now, of course, like I said, there'd be delegations from other countries. I also believe that a major player that got left out of the last Korean summit was what were the Russians. I mean, Russia shares a border with North Korea, shares a maritime border with South Korea, and I believe they had a delegation there, but of course Vladimir Putin himself wasn't there. I believe we should be including the Russians in these talks because, again, that's just another move that would isolate the Russians, which is really something we do not need this time. We need to be, again, reconciling relations with Russia. We need to be reconciling relations with most countries in the world, except the Chinese. I will say that. But I have rambled and raved for the past 40 minutes or so. Sorry about it being a bit of a shorter episode. GSP couldn't show up. He had some work stuff. You know what? That's okay. We all have real lives to get to. I have some school stuff starting next week, so the schedule may be a bit more sporadic. I'll try to keep this at least once a week. But thank you all for tuning in. Of course, I was multi-streaming this. You can also find this on StreamMe, which I'll link that right now in the chat, so you can subscribe to my channel. So next time we go live there, you guys can check it out. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in, and goodbye.